Here's a hard truth about relationships. No one is here to make you feel whole. But don't worry, because today we're going to talk about some placements in your chart and some themes and theories around love and relationships. I'm really passionate about talking about relationships because of my own design and my own experiences in my life. I truly believe that relationships are the foundation of our reality. And when I say that, there are two main reasons why I say that. And one of them is more material level and the other one's on a deeper soul level. On the material perspective, when we listen to people who spend a lot of time with the sick and the dying, one of the things that always comes up in the top two reasons or top two things they wish they would have done more of, relationships are always up there. They wish they would have spent more time with loved ones, that they would have made more time for relationships in their lives. The second one being another thing that I'm really passionate about is that they wish that they had the courage to live a more authentic life. Today, we're just going to talk about the relationships though. So on the surface, relationships are what give meaning and purpose to our lives. And especially during this day and age where we are inundated with screens everywhere and we are raising some of the most disconnected children out there right now, connection becomes even more important. This is the age of information and we are slowly losing relationships and the ability to understand how to relate to other people in a way that's healthy. The deeper soul perspective of this is that our relationship to life is what dictates our reality. It is what shapes the perception of our reality. And what do I mean by that? If you think about two different people having the exact same experience, maybe getting really sick, one of them could relate to that sickness by becoming a victim, by becoming sad and throwing their whole life away because of this illness, getting angry. And another person can see this as a gift from the universe, a wake-up call for them to start living their life differently. What's happening here isn't about what's actually physically taking place on the material plane. It's about the person's relationship to what's happening to them, the experience. How is it making them feel? When we understand this, this is what makes us truly become masters of our reality, to be able to transform even when we don't have the power to transform something on the physical realm. We have the ability always to deeply relate to what's happening in a different way. This is one of the gifts of meditation, is at least the type of meditation that I do and the frameworks that I teach around somatics, which is that how do we find a new relationship to the body? How do we create a relationship to the body? So today, we're going to talk more about the surface level of relationships, meaning the relationships in our lives, and not just the romantic relationships, although those seem to be the most important and or the most painful, but just relationships in general. But just know that underneath this, there's a deeper value to relationships and how we relate to one another and to all things around us, because once again, that relationship to everything that happens and everything that everybody that comes into your life is what creates the experience, is what creates reality for you. In my practice and in my observation of the world and other people running their practices and talking to them about it, a lot of people come to astrology for predictions and timing for love. When will I find love? Will I get married? Do you see that in the cards for me? And it's very clear why this is of importance, because as I said, relationships are the foundation of our reality. However, my work is different. While I do use predictive techniques, they're not the center of my work. The center of my work is really somatic shadow work, getting to the uncomfortable but very, very important programs that are running in the subconscious mind that are actually running your life and determining your relationship to all of the experiences in your life. So while I will use predictive techniques, I don't rely on them and I don't use them to answer questions like that. And I don't use the tarot for that either, because the tarot for me is just another tool to access the subconscious. I've talked about this at length in my shadow work videos, which I have a playlist of. if you want to check that out. So from a energetic perspective, looking at the root causes or the shadow causes of relational issues, we always come back to one truth. It is always your responsibility to relate to yourself first before expecting other people to meet that. Now, clearly this is a general message. I'm not talking to you specifically. I don't know your situation. So I very much understand that there are nuances, and I'm asking that you use your discernment when you listen to this, and don't take my word as law. Never take anybody's word as law. Always use your critical thinking skills and discernment to figure out, how does this feel in my body, which is why I teach you how to get into that relationship with your body. I have a workshop on my website called Turning Triggers into Gold, but in it I teach my framework, which is about learning to get in connection with yourself again through the body. And I just think it's the most important work that we can do, especially during this time. Before shadow work, right? Having a baseline of connection to our body is really important. So how do we become the creator of our own life here? Well, we become the creator when we take full responsibility over our relationships. In this video, I'm going to talk about certain placements in astrology that are going to be very important. If you want to go there, that's totally fine, but I actually think the most important part of this video is this conversation that we're having right now. Because theoretically, if we think about relationships being the foundations of everything in our lives, then every single placement has a relational aspect to it. The ones that we're going to talk about are going to be the ones that most commonly come up when we're talking about relationships, but it's definitely not exclusive to those planets and placements and houses. So I want you to keep this in mind. And I want you to ask yourself, like, how can I use my own chart as a blueprint of my own needs and learn how to meet those first before expecting other people to meet them? At the end of the day, we do want relationships around us that nourish us, that nurture us, and that meet our needs. However, the problem that I witness the most is when we're expecting to meet them to a standard that is higher than where we are meeting ourselves. And this is honestly, love and relationships are one of the most stubborn places for people to really shift around. It takes time. All of this takes time, right? Shadow work, therapy, the work that I do, which is kind of like a blend of coaching and therapy. I'm not a therapist by choice, but many people feel like I'm partially a therapist to them, but I bring in that coaching element as well. And of course, using astrology and human design, which makes the process more efficient, but we don't get cheat codes here, right? The process is the destination. The journey is the destination. And until we really understand that, we're always going to feel lost. We're always going to be unhappy. We're always going to be grasping. In order for you to even listen to me, I want to just tell you guys like why this is so important to me, besides the fact that I believe this truly shapes our reality. In another video, I talked about how I have Venus conjunct Chiron, conjunct my South Node in the 12th house. I don't know how much more karmic you can get around Venusian things like relationships. Maybe if you have Venus retrograde, we're in this together. So there's a lot of wisdom and there's a lot of pain. And at the end of 2022, my whole reality around relationships really started to shift. And that coincided with the end of my Saturn return, which happened in March of 2023. I talked about in that video as well that that's when I started getting white hairs, and that Saturn rules the aging process. And to me, and Saturn's in my 7th house. To me, that was a cementing when I started getting more white hairs after my Saturn return, a cementing of the wisdom, the earned wisdom that I have around relationships. I have a history of having very intense, chaotic, toxic, sometimes abusive relationships. And I've only had a handful of romantic relationships, but even in my friendships and just relating to people I don't even know strangers. It was very, very, very difficult for me for a very long time. And now I'm not going to sit here and act like everything's perfect now, but where I am now in my relationships versus just 2 years ago is just completely different. I relate to people in a very different way. And that's why I'm so passionate, because I know what's possible. And yes, it took time, but if you put in the work, like when I say it takes time, it's because many of us go to, let's say, therapy or astrology sessions, like the work that I do, mentoring people through this work, and expect the results to come there. But I do shadow work every day. Not this like I sit down every morning and I do, no. In the moment, when I feel sensations arise, and this is why it's important to have that connection to your body. When we feel those sensations rise in our body, we recognize, ooh, this is me getting triggered. What's going on here? What's actually happening here? And taking care of it. You know, sometimes we can't do it right in that moment, but we can do it later. I talk about this in the workshop as well. If we do that, things happen a lot faster. But we still have to learn to love this process. We have to love the journey. Our astrology is the mirror, the blueprint, whatever, the map of what we are learning to embody, not what somebody else is here to give us. Until we learn to love ourselves and give ourselves what we need, relationships are going to be difficult. I could talk about this forever, because often when I say this, people go into the far end of like, well, I am giving myself everything I need, but now I don't have anyone around me because I've put up these boundaries. But instead of boundaries, many of us have put up walls, and boundaries are meant to be porous. They're meant to be filters. So this process of turning those walls into filters is a journey. Each person and relationship in your life is the invitation to a new evolution of you if you allow it. Many of us who came here with difficult placements around love and relationships, and even if you have amazing aspects to love and relationships, they're not easy. Human beings are so complex, and then you add a second person to that? Like, are you kidding me? It's never easy for anybody. But some of us just have some extra karma there, right? And karma can be burned through fast, by the way. It doesn't have to be a lifelong thing. And karma can then become wisdom, right? Every person and relationship is an invitation to a new evolution of you if you will allow it. People come into our lives to teach us where we have neglected ourselves, and then we point the finger and say, it's your fault. Once again, please use your discernment when you're listening to these words, because I understand that we are all in different phases of our relationships, and we are dealing with different people, and some people have a lot of issues that have nothing to do with us, and therefore we have to learn how to take care of ourselves and not expect other people to do it. When you energetically give yourself what you need, on an energetic level, you are setting a standard that is giving people an opportunity to then rise up and meet that standard. I often talk about it like this. It's like, this is you, this is the other person, they're over here doing them, okay? And you're like, man, be like this, be more like this. And then the other person is like, stuck here because you're over here trying to get them to be some sort of way. And the more that we learn to move back and say, I got me, do you see the available space for somebody to move differently now? You give them an opportunity to meet you where you are. I want to get into some of these placements and how we can use them to learn more about ourselves, so we can stop outsourcing love and actually experience healthier relationships in our lives. So first and foremost, let's talk about the placement that most people think of when they think about relationships, which is Venus. And this is always interesting to me because we think about Venus and we think about how she rules values in our lives and beauty and art and harmony. Mythologically, Venus has a lot to do with the pleasure aspects of love, actually. So we'll talk about another placement as well that is more so about the commitment aspect of love, but Venus shows us what we're here to value in ourselves first. We look at the sign, we look at the house, we look at the aspects, and we look at the ruler of the sign that it's in. So for example, my Venus is in Cancer, so the fact that it's in Cancer, the house, it's in the 12th house, the aspects, it's conjunct Chiron and the South Node, it's opposing Neptune and Uranus. The aspects, I'm going to explain to you guys at the end here what I recommend for people because it can get really complicated with astrology, which is why people seek people like myself, astrology. I do astrology, human design, tarot, shadow work, all this stuff in my sessions because it's kind of our job to help you integrate that if that's not something that is your job to do. So then you think about the ruler of Cancer, where my Venus sits, and it's the moon, and I think about the moon going into where it is in my chart. So you see how a lot of information can come just from your Venus sign. When we think about Venus, it's how we value our lives, yes, and what we value harmony in. So for example, Venus in Cancer, emotional harmony. But it's also pleasure, right? So we seek pleasure through our Venusian sign and aspects and placement. So as you can tell, my Venus in the 12th house really loves spirituality, the 12th house, solitude, meditation. The next thing I want to look at is the moon. The moon is our unconscious needs, right? So this is where it gets kind of iffy. This is where a lot of shadow work has to happen, okay? And I just want to say, like, shadow work is inherently super uncomfortable. Like, inherently super uncomfortable. Once again, I have a playlist if you guys are like, need more information about shadow work. I talk a little bit more about it there. We have to be willing to like learn to love the discomfort if we do this stuff because for example, you look at the moon, the sign it's in, the house it's in, the ruler, the aspect, or some signs have two rulers, by the way, right? So for example, my moon is in Sagittarius. I've talked about this often. My moon is completely unaspected by orb. Freedom and commitment are a huge shadow area of mine. Meaning like consciously, I understand that I need those things, but I don't realize all the way that that seeps through all the time. Right? So I have to be very, very aware about when it comes through and I'm not even noticing it, right? So the moon is the needs that we so desperately need. But once again, the moon is unconscious. This is where shadow work can be really good. I talked about the moon in my shadow work and astrology video as well. This is the next thing I want to talk about because people don't really talk about Juno, and I don't understand why, because people use Venus as like the commitment planet, and mythologically, Venus is not really about commitment at all, actually. She's about desire and like pleasure and enjoyment of the love process. When we're talking about relationships, Juno was Zeus's wife, Jupiter's wife, and she is a sign that is kind of associated to Libra and Scorpio, because she does have some vengeful aspects to her because Jupiter was not a really great husband to her, and she took out her revenge on the women rather than on Jupiter, on Zeus. So Juno or Hera is about commitment, what you're committed to. So once again, I'm using mine because it's just the easiest one to use, right? My Juno is in Aquarius. So we're seeing like freedom come up again. Freedom in Aquarius is different than freedom in Sagittarius, but just, you know, keeping track of this here. So whatever sign you have Juno in, what house she's in, if she's aspecting your Venus in some way that's going to change or color the Venus in a different way, right? It's definitely going to be a desire to be more committed in relationships. Then let's get to the 7th and 8th house, because this is where things get interesting. Especially in the 7th house, it's directly opposite you. When something is directly opposite you, it can show up very often in the other. So I want you to think about your 7th house. If you have planets there, it gets really, really important. If you have no planets there, it's still very important. We look at the sign on the cusp of that house, And so let's say the cusp of that house is Leo, your Aquarius rising. Then we look at the ruler of Leo, the sun, and where it goes. And that also brings another aspect to the relationship into your world. Planets in the 7th house are very easily disowned by us because we just let somebody else take the reins on it, right? If we think about astrology showing us this like reflection of ourselves through the other, right? Like if we think about astrology, it's not about giving you a savior. It's about giving you somebody who can reflect parts of you back to you. It's such a gift, you know? So I'll give you my example is that like I have Saturn in the 7th, and I met Saturn in my partners and my friends in the worst possible way, right? So cold, harsh, cruel, heartless. And so it'd be really easy for me to just sit there and say, oh, everyone I meet is like this. But then I had to start thinking like, well, why are they like that? Whatever is going on in your 7th house is asking for you to integrate that energy, even if it's a sign, right? So for Aquarius rising, having Leo in the 7th house, it would be Leonian qualities, shining, taking up space, being too much, letting yourself stand out, acting like royalty, not following the crowd, doing what you want to do. So for me, what started this process really was becoming my own Saturn. And I often tell my clients that I feel like in my life now, because of this, and in my one-on-one work with clients, I very much act as like a holistic Saturnian figure to them. Because many of us don't have a great relationship with Saturn. And so even people who are in my life who are very Capricornian, they, through the process of me owning my Saturn, it gave them room to evolve as a Saturnian person. And now our relationship is completely different. Not because I forced them to change or secretly hoped that they would change, but until I realized that I was handing my Saturn responsibility to everybody out there and I was giving them free reins. And they were simply reflecting back like, you gotta hold yourself better. You gotta hold yourself more accountable. You gotta hold the boundaries of Saturn better. You gotta learn what it is to truly take care of yourself. The 8th house is the deep intimacy that can happen once you've learned to face the deepest and darkest parts of yourself. So the 7th house feels like the first step, and then the 8th house, the sign, any planets there, the ruler of the sign that rules that house. Once you face your own shadow, this is like a gift that's given to you. Vulnerability is always about self-trust. Vulnerability is always about self-trust. It's not about trusting other people with what you want to give them, but trusting yourself that you can handle whatever happens once you put it out into the world. And a lot of my work is teaching you how to regain that self-trust, because it's not about the other person. We always say, oh, I don't trust this person. Oh, I don't trust this person. But when you trust yourself to deal with it, even if that person betrays you, that's a whole new type of power and strength. And this is where our triggers really happen in the 8th house. Very much happen in the 8th house, because this is the water house. So let's talk about, we have these things, and like I said, you really could use every single planet, like Mars even. If we think about Mars, about action and conflict in our relationships, you can look at your Mars sign as well. So one of the ways that I recommend doing this, if you are overwhelmed by all the things I just said, the sign, the rulers, the house that it goes in, all the different placements, and you're not wanting to see an astrologer or somebody who can help you integrate the information, start simple, okay? What are the signs? What is your Venus in? Research that. What is Venus in Cancer? Moon in Aquarius. Okay, what is that about? Don't think about the houses so much. Don't think about the aspects. Do it little by little. And maybe for each placement, you can just like write a few keywords and then go through that list and see what keywords come up again and again. And maybe through that process, you'll see, oh wow, like for me, freedom comes up a lot. And that's very pertinent to my relationships. Like we could go through every single placement and talk about the relationships, but these are the ones that I find are the most important when we're talking about seeing where we need healing so that we can embody it and then attract it into our lives. So once again, very much less about like, when will I meet somebody, and more about how can I use this energy to love myself so well that the connection is inevitable because I found it in myself first. I embodied it myself first. And like I said, the relationships around you can change. And yes, some of them can fall away. But from my experience, unless there's a lot of unbalanced dynamics in the relationship and a person is not willing to change, a lot of times we're able to salvage most of our relationships because love does not complete you. Love expands you once you've learned how to come home to yourself. I'd love to hear down below your thoughts on relationships. Once again, this is not telling you to stay or go or whatever in your relationships or make excuses for people, but it's to take radical responsibility. Often people ask me like, how did you change so much in your life in 1 year? You know, my relationship, my long-term relationship, and my friendships. I quit my career as a pharmacist. I healed my chronic pain after 10 years, moved to a different state, like all these things. And when people ask me that, I'm like, it sounds so easy, but it's honestly like learning to take full accountability and responsibility over my life. And knowing that nobody's job is to save me, I'm here to heal and start being the person I need rather than looking for them. No one is coming to save us. So I'd love to hear what's your Venus, your moon, even your Mars, your 7th house, 8th house. Do you have planets there? Do you have a stellium there? Ooh, that brings a lot of energy. What are your thoughts on relationships? How is this going in your life? And then I have a couple of reflection questions that I want to ask you guys as well. And feel free to journal on this or put it in the comments down below. I'd love to read this. Where in your relationships do you find yourself waiting for somebody else to give you what you haven't yet given yourself? And number 2, what shadow pattern keeps showing up in your love life? And what might it be asking you to heal within yourself first? I hope that this video has been helpful for you guys. This is the type of work that I do in my one-on-one sessions. We use astrology, we use human design, absolutely, but they're not the core of my work. The core of my work, like I said, is looking at that shadow, integrating it through the body, finding the energetic roots for multiple different things that are happening in your life, because oftentimes they're coming from very similar root causes, right? So that's why we like to lovingly grab those roots and look at them. Also, my workshop is down in the link below as well. Make sure you guys are subscribing to my Substack because you guys will be the first to know about upcoming workshops there. And I also have a lot of reflections that I put on there that don't make it into my videos. Yeah, thanks so much for being here and sitting with me and going through this with me. And I'll see you guys next time.